Now, writing techniques are different than writing skills. It's more about the methodology of polishing up your story overall. A technique is more about how you set up the story rather than the words that you use to write it. For instance, using repetition, build, and contrast can accentuate parts of a scene. Those elements are part of your technique. Well, I'm Mike with WriterSanctuary, and in week 10 of Reedsy's Master Class, How to Write a Novel, Tom Bromley breaks down writing techniques and how to use them in your manuscript. On day 1, we went over the rule of 3. I've heard this a few times before, but I really never put too much thought into it until now. This is when things often pop up in threes, whether it's in a story or in real life. The number 3 creates a rhythm and pattern while writing. Now, this can be apparent in a novel or when you're considering a trilogy. I mean, how often do you see a series of novels that are written in an even number? Now, the rule of 3 creates emphasis on the third element, especially if it's done with a surprise, which I am a fan of writing in my books. In most cases, ascending patterns deliver more of an impact as they go up. At least that's the hope with most writers. Then you have a contrasting set of 3, whereas the first 2 are wrong answers, while the third one is the correct or the punchline. After that, you have a dialectical 3, where the first 2 are so wildly different from the third, such as Goldilocks stealing the porridge and squatting in a bear's house. The bottom line is that the third element can deliver a satisfying resolution when structured correctly. Now, this could be throughout the entire book or limited to a single scene. I can't really do this point justice, as Tom Bromley's examples of how they were used was quite informative. I could create an entire video on the rule of 3. Now, day 2 is about using repetition, how effective it can be in a scene. Now, bad repetition is usually accidental and could be a sign of lazy writing or poor editing. Now, we all do this, especially when wrapping up the first draft. Sometimes you can literally see the word choices of when someone stopped and when they came back in to continue writing. Now, sometimes we'll unconsciously repeat the same sentence or structure. In fact, Kingmaker was riddled with duplicate content, sometimes a paragraph or two apart. That's one of the things I was telling you about, where you can literally see when someone stopped writing and they came back about a month later to continue, because sometimes you forget what you wrote, and if you don't go over what you completed in the past, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. I had quite a few of those, but I fixed most of them, I hope. And this is meaning it was the same delivery, only worded differently. Now, one glaringly obvious issue is starting and ending a few consecutive sentences with the same word. A good repetition, on the other hand, is when it's done for a reason or to deliver a specific effect to the scene, and it can be done in a variety of ways. Now, repetition, when done with thought and reason, can create emphasis on a subject, which is often effective for starting and ending scenes. Now, on day 3, we went over ways to build the story or scene. The build-up is all about increasing impact for a key moment. On a micro level, build-up can be controlled by sentence and paragraph length, as we discussed in earlier videos. On a medium level, build is done through the use of scene structure as a whole, such as using the rule of 3 by slowing down the pace or creating distraction and misdirection. On a macro level, though, the build is more spread throughout the entire story structure. But at the end of the day, the build, repetition, and the rule of 3 often work in tandem to deliver a more rewarding read. And day 4 was all about contrast and adding emphasis through difference and juxtaposition. A contrast is apparent in all forms of art to highlight or accentuate specifics. An example of a contrast in a story, you could have 2 or more varying points of view, which could ultimately be different from one another. You could have a contrast in main characters, such as in my newest book, where one character is more serious while the other is more lighthearted. Even in Kingmaker, I have a contrast in characters, especially between Diemus and Pelor. Now, contrasting in scenes can have a variety of elements, including the senses. It all depends on how you're structuring your story. The bottom line is that contrast can accentuate what's going on while increasing the impact of a scene for the reader. On day 5, Tom Bromley went over imagery and how it works to promote a scene in the mind of the reader. Whether it's a metaphor or a real layout, both can add emphasis to what is being told. If it's done right, imagery can be an amazing addition for a scene. However, it can ultimately crap it out if it's done poorly. Now, when used sparingly, imagery can be an effective element for your story, but if it's done too often, it can make the manuscript scene bland. It's like listening to the same song on repeat for about 5 hours. Eventually get sick of it, and it no longer has that awesomeness you enjoyed from the start. Now, avoid being too literal with the imagery, as it's often less effective. You can use imagery for focusing on a vital part of a scene, as a motion to build up a scene, or themed as part of an ongoing part throughout the book for your character. Think of it kind of like a running joke throughout the book. It's a visual that is a constant reminder that can bring the story together. On Saturday, the author interviews this week were all about writing routines. Every author has a unique flow for writing his or her novel, and the routines we all use are dependent upon lifestyle. Now, there's really no right or wrong answer when it comes to a writing routine. It's all about what works best for you. We all have varying levels of chaos, and a lot of writers have to balance it all in order to finish writing the book. Though one common denominator for authors is the ability to be flexible. That's because life happens, and even the best laid plans can crumble to dust. One thing I think is kind of cool throughout this course is how much I have in common with the author Andy Maslin. We both have similar views on writing cinematically, as well as sharing various different types of writing routines. At the end, there was quite a bit worth considering in this week's course. For one thing, I don't know if I add enough imagery outside of the literal sense. And I'm relatively certain I don't implement a lot of repetition outside of accidentally writing it. However, I've found that it's better not to try to force those things if the scenes or manuscript don't call for it. For instance, I'll keep the repetition in mind when writing the story, but I'm not going to force it in somewhere for the sake of adding it. Because when you start forcing things, that's when your story falls apart. Nonetheless, there was quite a bit worth considering, and I'll keep all of them in mind as I continue writing Fury and the new book. I really need to come up with a title for it. Even a project title would be better than The New Book. Anywho, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. For more videos about self-publishing, freelance writing, blogging, or anything else I cover, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. That's going to do it for me today. I'm going to get back to work. I'll see you next time.